Lo-fi guitar is a staple of modern heavy music. Lo-fi idea stemmed from the old-school filtered radio guitar effect and evolved into something new. Lo-fi guitars provide a few very important aspects to your music. You can utilize the lo-fi to change the dynamics of the section, drop it or build it. Or you can fit a lo-fi riff into an otherwise busy section and not clutter it up. The difference between the old and the new lo-fi approach is not massive, yet the details make the big difference in the perception of the guitar tone. Few old-school examples of the lo-fi guitar effects, starting with the Pink Floyd, the classics, and check it out. This does sound like a small, tiny radio speaker. Or let's listen to some Muse. This guitar tone is not that lo-fi, however, it is quite heavily filtered. There is not much of a low end, and the most of the signal sits in the present range of the spectrum. Compare it to the modern guitar lo-fi, it sounds like this. There is quite a bit of a difference. This is such a cool example of a lo-fi riff not stepping onto the main chugs and not taking away from the vocal line, however, adding that extra layer of depth and dynamics to the section that would have sounded too sparse otherwise. In this video, you will learn how to create a great sounding modern lo-fi guitars. Let's go! Pumps me up every time so much. Such an amazing songwriting. So, let's break down the application of this lo-fi effect and the way you can dial similar tones in your mixes and productions. Hey, I'm Dr. Mike Trubetskov and I'm here to bring valuable information on metal recording, production and mixing. So mate, please like and subscribe and share this video with your friends to let the algorithm push the value. Let's do it. Alright, so here's the lo-fi guitar in solo, and I will disable the filter that creates this effect. And the riff sounds just like this. A little bit harsh, obviously way too full for such an effect. There are a couple of ways to achieve the lo-fi in the modern productions, and let's look into the first way first, which is you have your guitar chain, in this case it is a tone match, followed by an EQ, typical Buster style EQ before the amp, followed by the Death Western plugin, followed by the IR. I'm using Esprit here, which is super cool, and followed by an EQ to cut some of the muddy frequencies and harsh frequencies as well. And the way you can dial in such an effect, you put a filter, which is just an EQ, and the key here, this is really bloody sensitive. It is very, very important to dial this in correctly. And I'll show you what I mean. For the old school guitar tone, so I'll just use this EQ here. And this doesn't sound right. It sounds a little bit too harsh, to be honest. You can see that I'm using a very heavy scoop. Basically, one of the filters goes over the frequency of the other filter. So they actually overlap with each other and leave only a little bit of a signal left. Let me start from scratch though. This is your old school lo-fi, straight away. Because it sounds really harsh. It doesn't leave the focus on the mid-range. I've experienced that dialing in a good lo-fi can be more challenging than you think. The principle is super simple. You just have two filters and you try to find a good range where the guitar contains the mids mainly. But if you miss it, if you don't dial in this right, it will sound really harsh or otherwise really boomy, like this. doesn't give you the right effect. Also, you can automate these frequencies. But I believe that this has been overdone during the 2015 metalcore and is no longer that valid. From the 2023-2024 productions that I had a very thorough listen through. Let's try dialing this in properly. 12 decibels per octave, in my experience, is not steep enough. Let's try the 18. And this sounds pretty good now. If we go 12, this is not good. This is really harsh. It leaves the harsh top end in, and you don't want that. If we try 24, it actually doesn't sound too bad. If we compare it with the original filter that I have applied, this would sound better this way. But okay, so in a nutshell, experiment with high and low pass filters after the amp and use a steep filter, 18 or 24 decibel per octave, and make sure that they are situated really close to each other and maybe even overlap. And this will help you to focus just on the mid-range of the signal and achieve a smooth mid-reach tone that can be expanded and grow into the next section. Let's experiment with different types of filters, different types of distortion and saturation that can change the tone of our lo-fi. My assumption is that you can actually saturate the signal after the amp, after the filter, or before the filter. Let's see whether this is a valid approach. So I have this filter which we dialed in together, and now we use the lo-fi, which additionally filters the top end here and decreases the bit rate and adds distortion and saturation. And this will sound like this. Which is pretty cool. It sounds quite distant. And now what happens if we put that before the filter? I think that this sounds a bit better, but it bumps up the low end not in a overly pleasant way. However, this sounds quite cool as it gives that digitized, bit crushed sort of character. Next, let's experiment with some other types of saturation. Let's try fuzz. This is actually really cool, and in this way you can automate this frequency here. I think it's a free plugin as well. You can automate this to make the guitars build before that filter in a more subtle way rather than your 2015's lo-fi breakdown build, which I think everyone got sick of. And let's try this after the filter as well now. The difference is quite negligible. I actually like it after the filter a bit more, because that saturation, the top end, is brought back in a nicer way. But I think you can go ahead and experiment with that placement in whichever way you wish. And finally, let's try some volcano. I'll get rid of our initial filter and we can try a band pass maybe. Not fun. So again, steeper bandwidth. You can see how insanely sensitive this becomes. I move it by maybe 50 Hertz. And it either sounds right or doesn't. And next you can experiment with the type of the filter. distort some more. You can either go clean or gritty, distorted. The sky is the limit here. You can experiment with different flavors, but the general principle is to just apply the filter after the amp, some kind of a filter, and play with that, play with saturation either before or after, up to your liking. So this is it on creating a modern sounding lo-fi guitar. You can see that it is a very sensitive procedure, it's quite subtle, and it's simple as well. So, I hope that you find this video useful, and I hope that this excites you to experiment with some cool lo-fi riffs in your productions. I'm Dr. Trubetskov, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care.